Thomas sat at the wooden desk in his garage. The clock on the wall showed 11:14 p.m. His hands ached from holding Emily for 3 hours straight. The colic had finally stopped 20 minutes ago. He opened the leather notebook, picked up the pen. Not his pen, Sarah's pen. The Mont Blanc she'd carried for 15 years, the one the paramedics gave him at the hospital in a plastic bag. Her wedding ring had been in there too. Her phone. Keys. He pressed the tip to paper. Letter number 12. His handwriting looked wrong tonight. Letters slanting too far right. Words that needed 2 attempts before they resembled language. For when you're 10 years old and someone breaks your heart. Emily, when I was 10, a girl named Maria told me I was too quiet to be interesting. It hurt for months. Your mother said years later that quiet people notice things loud people miss. She was right. Don't let anyone convince you that being yourself is wrong. He set the pen down. Checked his watch. 11:31 p.m. 17 minutes. 5 sentences. Last week, the same letter took 8. Through the kitchen window, he could see David at the table, still awake. Waiting. Thomas turned off the lamp, walked back inside.
David looked up when Thomas came through the door. "You were out there again." Thomas washed his hands at the sink. "Couldn't sleep." "You haven't slept in days." "I sleep enough." David stood. "Dad, you look like you've aged 10 years in 3 months." Thomas dried his hands on the blue towel hanging from the oven. Sarah's towel. She'd bought it the week before the accident. He used it every day. Not because he needed to, because it was hers. David's voice softened. "I know you miss her, but Emily needs you here, not half dead from exhaustion, not disappearing into that garage every night." Thomas set down the towel. "I'm not disappearing." "Then what are you doing out there?" Thomas filled a glass with water he didn't want. "Thinking." "About what?" Thomas looked at his son. "Things I need to remember." David exhaled slowly. "You're scaring me." Thomas walked past him toward the stairs. "I'm fine." "You're not fine." The words hung in the air between them. Thomas kept walking.
The next morning, Thomas drove to his studio, a small rented space downtown where he met clients twice a week. He'd been an architect for 42 years. Retired at 65, small projects still found him anyway. Residential additions, garage conversions, work that paid enough to matter without demanding too much. Today, the Chens wanted a sunroom. Thomas spread the blueprints across the table. Mr. Chen pointed to the eastern wall. "Can we extend this by 4 feet?" Thomas studied the drawing. The numbers blurred for a second. He blinked hard. They sharpened. "Yes," he said. "You'll need a permit variance." Mrs. Chen smiled at her husband. "See, I told you he'd know." Thomas picked up his pen to make a note. Permit, variance, east wall extension. When he looked down, he'd written something else. Permit, Emily first bicycle. He stared at the words, crossed them out quickly. Mr. Chen leaned forward. "Everything okay?" Thomas cleared his throat. "Fine, just thinking ahead." He rewrote the note. This time, his hand obeyed.
That evening, Emily started crying at 6:22 p.m. Thomas walked her around the living room, hummed the song he used to sing to David 40 years ago, rocked her against his chest. She screamed anyway. David came downstairs at 7:15. "Let me take her for a while." Thomas shook his head. "I've got her." "Dad, you've been holding her for an hour." "I said I've got her." David stepped back, watched his father pace the room with a screaming infant, watched him stumble slightly near the couch, watched him catch himself. At 9:51 p.m., Emily finally stopped. Her breathing evened out. Thomas stood frozen in the middle of the room, afraid to move, afraid she'd start again. David was asleep upstairs by then. The house settled into silence. Thomas carried Emily to her crib, set her down with the care of someone defusing a bomb. She didn't wake. He checked his watch. 10:04 p.m. He walked to the garage.
Thomas turned on the desk lamp, opened the notebook. Letter number 13. For when you don't know what you want to do with your life. The blank page stared back at him. The words were somewhere in his head. He just had to find them. Emily, I didn't know I wanted to be an architect until I was 25. I thought I'd spent time searching for nothing. Your mother told me some people need time to hear themselves. You're not behind, you're listening. He read it back, changed searching for nothing to learning to listen. Better. The clock showed 10:52 p.m. He turned the page, started letter number 14. For when someone hurts you and you don't know if you should forgive them. His hand cramped halfway through the second sentence. He shook it out, kept writing. Emily, forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about whether you want to keep carrying what they did. Your mother forgave me for missing her father's funeral. I was in Denver on a project I thought mattered. It didn't matter as much as being there. She knew that. She forgave me anyway, not because I deserved it, because she didn't want to carry anger. He set the pen down. His vision swam slightly. He closed his eyes, counted to 10, opened them. Better. The clock showed 1:47 a.m. He closed the notebook, turned off the light, went inside.
3 weeks later, Thomas forgot a meeting with the contractor for the Chen project. The man called twice. Thomas didn't recognize the number, didn't answer. When David asked about it, Thomas said he'd been working on something else. The next day, David made an appointment with Dr. Patel. Not a suggestion, an order. Thomas sat in the waiting room, staring at a magazine he couldn't read. Dr. Patel called him in. She was younger than David, efficient, direct. She asked about sleep. Thomas said 7 hours. A lie. She asked about stress. He said manageable. Another lie. She looked at David. What are you seeing? David hesitated. He's exhausted. He's forgetting things. He won't tell me what he does in the garage until 2 in the morning every night. Dr. Patel turned to Thomas. What do you do in the garage? Thomas looked at his hands. I write. She waited. Letters, he said. For my daughter. For when she's older. How much are you sleeping? 3 hours, maybe 4. You're caring for an infant with severe colic. You're working, and you're writing until 2 a.m. Thomas nodded. Dr. Patel set her pen down. Mr. Oliveira, sleep deprivation accelerates cognitive decline. Your brain needs rest. If you continue like this, you won't be there to see her grow up. Thomas stood. Thank you for your time. He walked out before David could follow.
That night, Thomas didn't go to the garage. He sat in the living room with Emily asleep on his chest. David came downstairs, sat in the chair across from him. After a long silence, David spoke. Do you remember when I broke my arm? Thomas looked up. I was 8, David continued. You were in Chicago. Mom called.
You said you'd be home in 3 days. Thomas remembered. You came home in 6, David said. The project ran long. I know. I'm not angry about it anymore, but I see you now with Emily, and I don't understand what changed. Thomas adjusted Emily carefully. She stirred but didn't wake. I was a bad father to you. David shook his head. You were an absent father. There's a difference. Thomas said nothing. You're trying to fix it now, David said. I get that, but you're killing yourself. I don't have time to go slow. David frowned. What does that mean? Thomas looked down at Emily. I have Alzheimer's, he said quietly. Early stage. 2 to 3 years before I start losing memories. The room went silent. David stared at him. When were you going to tell me? I just did. David stood. Walked to the window. Stood there with his back turned for a full minute. When he turned around, his voice was steady. The letters. Thomas nodded. How many have you written? 24. How many are you planning? 70, maybe 80. David sat back down, rubbed his face with both hands. You can't do this alone. I'm not asking for help. That's not what I meant.
For the next 2 weeks, David took over the night shifts with Emily. He made sure Thomas ate. He didn't mention the letters again. But he noticed when Thomas went to the garage, and he noticed when Thomas came back looking older. One night, David found Thomas asleep at the desk. The notebook was open. Letter number 28, half finished. David didn't wake him. He picked up the notebook carefully, read the incomplete page. For when you need to make a hard choice and there's no right answer. Emily, when you were 6 months old, I had to choose between keeping my architecture license active or spending nights with you. I chose... The sentence stopped mid-word. Thomas's pen had slipped from his hand. David set the notebook down, looked at his father slumped over the desk, snoring softly. He picked up the blanket from the workbench, draped it over Thomas's shoulders, turned off the lamp, left him there.
2 months later, Thomas collapsed at the Chen house. He'd gone to check measurements for the sunroom. Mrs. Chen found him sitting on the ground outside, staring at the blueprints. She called David. By the time David arrived, Thomas was standing, insisting he was fine, just dizzy from the heat. Mrs. Chen's expression said she didn't believe him. Neither did David. David drove him home. Didn't speak the entire way. When they pulled into the driveway, David turned off the engine. Sat there. You're done working, he said. Thomas opened his door. That's not your decision. David grabbed his arm. It is my decision. Because when you pass out again and crack your head open, I'm the one who has to explain to Emily why her father isn't coming home. Thomas pulled his arm free. I need the income. No, you don't. I've been paying your bills for 2 months. Thomas froze. You think I didn't notice? David said. You've been depositing your paychecks and not touching them. You're not working for money. You're working because you're too proud to admit you can't anymore. Thomas got out of the car, slammed the door, walked inside without looking back.
That night, David went to the garage while Thomas was upstairs with Emily. He opened the desk drawer. Inside were 12 notebooks.
all identical, all filled with Thomas's handwriting. David opened the first one. Letter number 1. For when you learn to read this. Emily, by the time you can understand these words, I won't remember writing them. I have a sickness in my brain that takes memories away. But I need you to know who I was before I forgot. David read the entire letter. Then the second. Then the third. By letter number 10, he was crying. By letter number 20, he understood what his father was doing. By letter number 31, he heard footsteps. Thomas stood in the doorway. David looked up. How many of these are there? Thomas stepped inside, closed the door behind him. 31, he said. I'm aiming for 70. David set the notebook down carefully. You're writing her a life. Thomas sat on the workbench. I'm writing her a father. David wiped his face. You already are her father. Not for long. Thomas picked up Sarah's pen from the desk, turned it over in his hands. Every night I sit here, he said. I forget a little more about what I did that day. Sometimes I forget what I wrote the night before. But when I'm writing to her, I remember everything. Sarah, you, the buildings I designed, the mistakes I made. He looked at David. These letters are the only proof I existed the way I want her to remember. David's voice cracked. Dad, she's not going to care what you built. She's going to care that you were here. Thomas shook his head. I won't be here. That's the point. She'll have me, David said. I'll tell her. Thomas looked at him for a long time. You'll tell her what you remember, he said quietly. I'm writing down what I don't want her to forget.
Thomas stopped taking work. David stayed. The colic finally ended when Emily turned 8 months old. The house became quieter. Thomas's nights became shorter. He still wrote, but slower now. Letter number 32 took 3 nights. Letter number 33 took 5. By letter number 36, his hand barely worked. He'd rewrite the same sentence 4 times before it looked right. For when you have your first child. Emily, the day you were born, I held you and thought about all the ways I would fail you. I thought about every time I failed David. Your mother used to say that loving someone means showing up, even when you're terrified you'll get it wrong. He stopped, stared at the page. What came next? He knew there was more. Something about Sarah. Something she'd said when Emily was born. He closed his eyes, tried to see her face. It was blurry. He opened his eyes, looked at the pen in his hand. Sarah's pen. He knew it belonged to someone important. He just couldn't remember who. His chest tightened. He set the pen down, read what he'd written. It was enough. It had to be enough. He closed the notebook, stood, turned off the lamp. When he walked into the house, David was at the kitchen table. I'm done, Thomas said. David looked up. Done with what? Writing. David stood. You finished all 70. Thomas shook his head. 36. That's it? Thomas sat down slowly. That's all I have left.
6 months later, Thomas spent most of his days in a chair by the window. He didn't speak much anymore. When he did, the words came out wrong. David took care of Emily now. She was walking, saying a few words. Dada. No.
more. Thomas watched her sometimes, smiled when she laughed, but he didn't always recognize her. One afternoon, David brought the leather notebook into the living room, sat next to Thomas, opened to a random page. Letter number 23, for when you need to make a hard choice and there's no right answer. David read it out loud. Emily, when you were 6 months old, I had to choose between work and spending time with you. I chose you. It cost me my career. But careers end. You don't. Thomas turned his head slowly, listened. David continued. Your mother used to say that regret comes from choosing comfort over love. I spent 40 years choosing comfort. I'm choosing love now, even though it's late, even though I'm running out of time. Thomas's eyes focused. He looked at David. Who wrote that? He asked. David's voice caught. You did, Dad. He wrote it her Emily. Thomas looked confused. Who's Emily? David closed the notebook, set it on his lap. Your daughter, he said quietly. She's right there. He pointed to the corner where Emily was playing with blocks. Thomas followed his gaze, stared at her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression. He said her name. Emily. David's breath caught. Yes, that's Emily. Thomas looked back at David. I have a daughter? David nodded. You do. Thomas smiled. Small, fragile. That's good, he said. I always wanted a daughter. David opened the notebook again, read another letter, and another. And every time he did, Thomas remembered a little more. Not everything, but enough.
Emily turned 2 on a Tuesday. David made pancakes shaped like bears. Emily laughed when the ears fell off. Thomas sat at the table. He didn't speak. Hadn't spoken in 3 weeks. But he watched Emily, and when she brought him a piece of pancake, he took it. After breakfast, David carried the box of notebooks to the table. He did this once a week now, reading the letters out loud while Thomas listened. Today, he opened letter number 9. For when you're scared of something and don't know how to be brave. Emily, bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what matters even when you're terrified. The day you were born, I was more scared than I'd ever been. Your mother died bringing you into this world. I had to choose whether to let that fear turn into resentment or love. I chose love. Every day, I choose love. David's voice broke on the last sentence. He looked at Thomas. Thomas was crying. Silent tears down his face. David reached across the table, took his father's hand. Thomas squeezed back. Weak, but there. Emily climbed into Thomas's lap. He wrapped his arms around her automatically, held her the way he'd held her every night when she was a baby. David kept reading.
One morning, David found letter number 36 at the bottom of the box, the last one Thomas had written. For when you have your first child. He'd never read this one to Thomas. He'd been saving it. For when it felt right. Today felt right. He sat next to his father. Thomas was looking out the window. Emily was napping upstairs. David opened the notebook. Read. Emily, the day you were born, I held you and thought about all the ways I would fail you. I thought about every time I failed David. Your mother used to say that loving someone means showing up even when you're terrified you'll get it wrong. David stopped. The letter ended mid-thought. No closing. No signature. Just an incomplete sentence trailing off into blank space. He looked at Thomas. You never finished this one, he said softly. Thomas didn't respond.
David closed the notebook, set it aside. After a moment, he spoke again. "But I know how it ends," he said. "You showed up, Dad. You got it wrong a lot, but you showed up." Thomas turned his head, looked at David. For a brief moment, something cleared in his eyes. Recognition. He opened his mouth, struggled to form words. Finally, he managed to. "Thank you." David's vision blurred. He reached for his father's hand, held it. They sat like that until Emily woke up.
Thomas died on a Sunday morning in April. Quietly, in his sleep. Emily was 3. She didn't understand. David tried to explain, used words like gone and sleeping and heaven. She asked when Grandpa was coming back. David didn't know how to answer. Instead, he showed her the notebooks, opened letter number 1, read it to her, even though she was too young to understand. Over the years, he kept reading, 1 letter on each birthday, 1 when she started school, 1 when she came home crying because someone had been mean. By the time Emily turned 10, she could read them herself, but she still asked David to read them out loud, because hearing the words made her feel like her grandfather was there. On her 18th birthday, David gave her the box, 36 letters, all of them hers. She read them in one sitting, cried through most of them. When she finished, she called David. He came over, found her sitting on the floor surrounded by open notebooks. She looked up at him. "He knew me," she said. David sat down next to her. "He did. Even though he never got to know me. He knew you better than most people who've spent years together." Emily picked up letter number 36, the incomplete one. Read it again. "Why didn't he finish this one?" she asked. David took the notebook from her, read the last line. "Because he ran out of time," David said, "but he didn't run out of love." Emily leaned against him. They sat there for a long time. Later, Emily asked if she could keep the pen. Sarah's pen. The one Thomas had used to write every letter. David handed it to her. "When you have a daughter," he said, "you can use it to write to her." Emily held the pen carefully, turned it over in her hands. "I will," she said. And she did. If this story made you think about the people you love and the time you have left, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment about what you'd write if you knew you were running out of time. And subscribe for more stories about the choices we make when every moment counts. I'll see you in the next one.